Return the $40,000 your son took or stay out, Dad said, holding the door. My sister added, my daughter saw him near the safe. My name is Paisley Hartman. I'm 36 years old. For a living, I find the truth hidden in numbers. It's a quiet job, one that requires patience and an eye for things people try to hide. But the biggest lie I ever had to unravel had nothing to do with work. It was in my own home from my own family, and it almost cost me my son. It was supposed to be a normal Sunday, the kind that smells like roast chicken and freshly cut grass. Leo was buzzing in the passenger seat, explaining the complex strategy for a new video game level. I was only half listening to the details, but I was fully present, soaking in the simple, uncomplicated peace of a Sunday with my son. We were 5 minutes early, as always. Being reliable was my role. Being no trouble at all was my purpose. I pulled my sensible sedan into my parents' driveway, the contrast almost comical. Parked in front of me was my sister Avery's brand new luxury SUV. It was enormous and gleaming white, a monument to a life lived on credit and confidence. My car was practical, paid for, and invisible. Hers screamed for attention. It was a perfect summary of our lives. Leo grabbed the cheesecake we'd brought, and we walked up the familiar stone path. I could hear the murmur of the television inside, a comforting, normal sound. Everything felt exactly as it should. Then the door opened, and the world tilted. My father stood there, but he didn't smile or open his arms for a hug. His body filled the entire doorway like a human wall built to keep me out. His face, usually softened by a tired smile, was an unfamiliar mask of stone. "Dad?" I asked, the cheerful word dying on my lips. He cut me off, his voice flat and cold. "Return the $40,000 your son took, or stay out." The sentence was just a string of sounds, my brain refusing to assemble them into anything with meaning. 40,000? My son? I looked down at Leo, whose face was a canvas of pure confusion. The cheesecake box tilted in his hands, forgotten. From the shadows behind my father, Avery appeared, her face a perfect performance of sorrow, but her eyes were like ice chips, glittering with triumph. "My daughter saw him near the safe," she added, her voice dripping with false regret. My gaze flickered past them, searching for an ally, but there was none. My mother sat frozen on the sofa, her eyes glued to the television in a desperate, deliberate act of abandonment. My brother-in-law, Brad, stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed in a posture of smug judgment. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an ambush. They had held their trial, and we had just arrived for the sentencing. The initial shock receded, replaced by a strange, chilling calm. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I smiled. It was a quiet, placid smile, the one I get right before I unravel a network of lies. They had forgotten what I do for a living. They had forgotten that I find the truth that people bury in numbers. And in their arrogant cruelty, they had just handed me my next case. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. To understand their coldness, you have to understand the air we breathed in that house. From the very beginning, my sister Avery and I were cast in 2 different plays. She was the star of a glittering romantic comedy. I was a background character in a quiet, serious drama. Our parents were the producers, and they only ever really invested in one show. Avery was born dazzling. As a baby, she had bright blonde curls and a laugh that made strangers stop on the street. I was born 2 years later, with plain brown hair and a watchful, quiet disposition. Avery learned to charm. I learned to observe. While she was collecting smiles and compliments, I was figuring out how things worked. How the toaster oven browned bread just right. How to sort the laundry so the white stayed white. How to make my father's coffee without being asked. I thought that being useful was a form of love. I was wrong. It was just a form of employment. I remember my 8th birthday. I had wanted a specific science kit, one with beakers and a microscope. I had circled it in the catalog for months. That morning, I opened my presents and found a new vacuum cleaner for my bedroom and a set of grown-up encyclopedias. "It's important to be practical, Paisley," my mother had said, smiling, "and to keep your space tidy." Avery's 10th birthday 2 months later was a different story. She wanted a pony. She didn't get a pony, but she got a massive, elaborate party with a magician, a bouncy castle, and a custom-made doll that looked exactly like her. She got magic. I got chores. The pattern was set. Avery's wants were treated as needs. My needs were treated as inconveniences. The most vivid example, the one that's etched into my memory like a scar, was the car crash. I was 16. Avery was 18 and had just gotten her license. She was forbidden from driving my father's new sedan, his pride and joy. But one Friday night, her friends called. There was a party. She begged me to cover for her. "Just for an hour, Paisley. I'll be right back. Tell them I'm in my room with a headache." I hated lying, but I hated the thought of Avery's heartbroken face even more, so I agreed. 3 hours later, she stumbled through the back door, her face streaked with tears, smelling of cheap beer. "I hit something," she whispered, her whole body shaking. "A mailbox. The front of Dad's car is ruined." Panic seized me. Not for the car, but for her. I saw the explosion that was coming. So, in that dark kitchen, I did what I always did. I fixed it. I took her keys, went outside, and got in the driver's seat of the wrecked car. I pulled it a little further into the driveway. Then I walked back inside and woke our parents. My voice shook as I told the lie I had rehearsed. I took the car. "I'm so sorry. I just wanted to practice parking, and I hit the neighbor's mailbox." My father's face was a mask of disappointment. It was worse than yelling. He looked at me, the responsible one, and his trust in me evaporated. I was grounded for 2 months. I had to get an after-school job to pay for the damages. I spent every weekend cleaning the house from top to bottom. Through it all, Avery was the picture of sympathy. She would bring me lemonade while I scrubbed floors, whispering, "I feel so bad for you, Pies. You're the best sister ever." She never once offered to confess. The lie became the truth, and I became the untrustworthy daughter. She got away without a single consequence, and I learned a powerful lesson. In our family, the truth was less important than Avery's comfort. This dynamic followed us into adulthood. I chose a practical career. I became a forensic accountant because I liked order and logic. Numbers didn't lie. I put myself through state college, working 2 jobs to avoid debt. Avery went to a private university, majoring in communications. My parents paid for everything. Her tuition, her sorority dues, her spring break trips to Mexico. "She needs the experience," my father would say. "It's about networking." When I graduated, I got a firm handshake and a, "Well done. We knew you could do it." When Avery graduated, she got a car. Even after I was married and then divorced, even after I had Leo, my role remained the same. I was the family's unpaid consultant and emergency fund. My father, who ran a small contracting business, would call me in a panic every tax season. "Paisley, I can't make sense of these receipts. Can you just take a look?" Taking a look meant spending 40 hours of my personal time untangling a year's worth of chaotic bookkeeping, organizing everything into perfect ledgers, and saving him thousands of dollars. My reward was a pizza and him telling everyone at Sunday dinner, "Paisley's a whiz with numbers." Good thing, too. Her sister has the people skills. It was never presented as a favor I was doing. It was presented as a function I performed. Like a calculator, Avery and her husband, Brad, were a financial disaster. Brad was a commission-based salesman who was always one deal away from striking it rich. Avery spent money like it was an Olympic sport. The tearful calls were a regular occurrence. "Paisley, the mortgage is due and Brad's check is delayed. Can you just float us some money? I don't want to worry Mom and Dad." And I would do it. I'd transfer the money, telling myself it was to protect my parents from stress. But I knew deep down it was to maintain the family's fragile peace. I was propping up the illusion that everything was fine, that Avery, the golden child, was a successful adult. My savings account dwindled, but the family's perfect portrait remained intact. Standing on that doorstep, hearing them accuse my son, was like a film of my whole life playing back in an instant. Every sacrifice I'd made, every lie I'd absorbed, every time I'd put their comfort ahead of my own well-being, it had all been for nothing. It hadn't earned me their love or their trust. It had only taught them that I was a resource to be used and discarded. My silence had been my biggest mistake. I had let them define me as the quiet, capable, endlessly forgiving ghost in the family machine. I was so busy fixing their problems that I never stopped to ask if they were worth fixing. They hadn't just accused my son of theft. They had, in that one moment, devalued my entire existence. They had looked at my 36 years of loyalty and decided that a convenient lie was worth more. They thought they knew me. They thought I was the fixer. They were about to find out that a fixer knows exactly how things are put together, which means they also know exactly how to take them apart. The 10-minute drive home from my parents' house felt like a journey across a barren desert. The silence in the car was a physical thing, heavy, sharp, and suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, my eyes fixed on the road but seeing nothing. My mind was a chaotic storm of their faces. My father's stony disappointment, Avery's cold triumph, my mother's deliberate blindness. But the worst part was the presence beside me, Leo. He was so quiet, so still he might as well have been a ghost. He just stared out the passenger window, his reflection a pale, blurry shape against the passing houses. The cheesecake we had brought as a peace offering sat on the back seat, its sweet, creamy scent now smelling like sickness and deceit. It was a stupid, cheerful object in a world that had suddenly turned dark and ugly. When we pulled into our own driveway, the familiar sight of our small, tidy house offered no comfort. It felt like a stage set, a fake backdrop for a life that had just been shattered. I turned off the engine, and the silence that rushed in was even louder than before. For a full minute, we just sat there, suspended in the awful aftermath. Finally, I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned to him. "Leo," I started, but my voice broke. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Let's go inside." He nodded, not looking at me, and slowly got out of the car. I followed him, leaving the cheesecake to melt on the back seat. I couldn't stand to look at it. Inside, the house was quiet. Leo dropped his keys in the small bowl by the door, a habit I had taught him. He was always so careful, so methodical. He took off his shoes and lined them up neatly by the wall. These small acts of his usual, orderly self were almost unbearable to watch. He was trying so hard to pretend that things were normal. He walked into the living room and stood in the middle of the rug, looking lost. His shoulders were hunched, and he seemed to have shrunk. He was all gangly limbs and teenage awkwardness. But in that moment, he looked as small and vulnerable as he did when he was 5 years old. "Mom," he said, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it. He finally turned to face me, and his eyes were wide with a confusion so deep it felt like a physical wound. Why did Grandpa say that? Why would he think I would steal from him? My heart fractured. How do you explain a lifetime of toxic family dynamics to a 13-year-old? How do you tell your child that the people who are supposed to love him unconditionally have just sacrificed him to protect a lie? I walked over to him and put my hands on his shoulders. I knelt down so I was at his eye level, just like I did when he was little and had a nightmare. "Listen to me, Leo," I said, my voice low and fierce. "This has nothing to do with you. Do you hear me? Nothing. You did nothing wrong. You are good, and you are honest, and I am so proud of you." A tear escaped his eye and rolled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. "But he's Grandpa," he whispered. "And Aunt Avery. She said Maya saw me." "Aunt Avery is lying," I said, making my voice as firm and certain as a block of granite. "And Grandpa is choosing to believe her lie. That is their failure, not yours. It's a sickness in our family, a problem with the grown-ups that has been there for a very long time. They needed someone to blame for a mess Avery made, and they picked you because they thought it would be easy. They thought we wouldn't fight back." I could see him trying to process it. The simple black and white world of a child was colliding with the ugly gray mess of adult cowardice. He believed me, but he couldn't understand the why. "Are they going to call the police?" he asked, his voice trembling. My father's threat. "We can make it public." The cold fury I'd felt at the door surged back, hot and protective. "No," I said, with a certainty I didn't entirely feel. "They will not. Because we are going to fix this. Not by giving in, but by telling the truth. The real truth." He just nodded, the fight seeming to drain out of him. "Okay," he mumbled. He turned and walked down the hall to his bedroom, closing the door softly behind him. I stood there in the empty living room, listening to the quiet click of the latch. My son, my gentle, brilliant boy, was in his room, trying to understand how his own family could think he was a thief. My son, whose bedroom was a testament to his character. It was an organized landscape of creativity. On his desk, an old radio was carefully disassembled, its parts sorted into little trays, a project he was working on to see if he could make it Bluetooth compatible. His bookshelf wasn't filled with comics, but with books on coding and robotics. He didn't break things. He fixed them. The sheer injustice of it all finally broke through my calm. A sob escaped my throat, a ragged, ugly sound. I leaned against the wall, my legs too weak to hold me up, and slid to the floor. I buried my face in my hands and cried. I cried for my son and the piece of his innocence that was stolen today. I cried for the little girl who was never good enough. I cried for the woman who had spent her entire life cleaning up other people's messes, only to have them throw the worst one of all at her feet. The tears lasted for maybe 5 minutes. When they stopped, something else had taken their place. The hurt was still there, a deep throbbing ache in my chest, but the fury had cooled and hardened into something else. It was purpose. It was clarity. I got up from the floor. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed the cheesecake from the car, and threw the entire box into the outside trash can with a satisfying thud. I would not bring their poison into my house. This home, the one I had built for me and my son, was a sanctuary. It was a place of truth and safety, and I would burn the whole world down to keep it that way. They had targeted my son. They thought he was the weakest link. They had forgotten that a mother protecting her child is the most dangerous force on earth. My father wanted to handle this like family. Fine, I would. I would perform a full financial autopsy on their secrets, and I would present my findings. The audit was beginning. That night, after Leo was asleep, I sat at my dining room table, the house dark and silent around me. The only light was the cold blue glow of my laptop screen. My mind kept replaying my father's words, Avery's smirk, my mother's averted eyes. But another memory kept pushing its way through the noise, a memory from 3 months ago that now felt less like a conversation and more like a confession. I was at my office, buried in a complex fraud case for a corporate client. It was a messy one, full of shell companies and offshore accounts. I was tracing a series of ghost payments, my screen filled with spreadsheets and bank ledgers. I was in the zone, that deep state of concentration where the numbers start to tell a story. Then my personal cell phone buzzed, dragging me back to the surface. It was Avery. I almost let it go to voicemail. I had a deadline, but a familiar pang of guilt and duty made me answer. Paisley? Oh, thank God you picked up, she said. Her voice was already thick with manufactured panic. I could hear her fake crying, a breathy hiccuping sound she had perfected as a child to get out of trouble. I leaned back in my chair, already tired. What's wrong, Avery? I asked, my tone flat. It's just everything, she wailed. Brad's biggest client just pushed back their payment, so his commission is going to be late. Like a month late. And the property taxes on the house are due on Friday. We'll get a huge penalty if we're late. I don't know what to do. I pinched the bridge of my nose, closing my eyes. It was always a crisis. Always an emergency that required immediate cash. Did you talk to Dad? I asked, already knowing the answer. I tried, she said, her voice rising in frustration. He gave me this whole lecture about budgeting and living within our means. He's being so stubborn. He just doesn't understand the pressure we're under. I understood perfectly. My father wasn't being stubborn. He was being temporarily responsible. But Avery never took no for an answer. She just found a different route to yes. And that route was always me. He'll listen to you, Paisley, she pleaded, her voice shifting from panicked to flattering. You're the logical one. You can explain it to him in a way that makes sense. Frame it like a business loan. He respects you. He'll get it if it comes from you. He respects my skills, I thought, not me. There's a difference. But the old programming kicked in. Be the fixer. Keep the peace. Prevent the family drama from boiling over. A big fight between Avery and Dad would cast a cloud over our Sunday dinners for a month. It was easier to just handle it. Fine, I sighed, the word tasting like defeat. I'll call him. Oh, thank you, she gushed, the tears miraculously gone. You're literally a lifesaver. I owe you big time. She didn't owe me. The debt was mine. The cost of being the responsible one was enabling the irresponsible one. I hung up, and after taking a deep breath, dialed my father's number. I put him on speakerphone so I could keep working on my spreadsheets. Hey, Dad, I began, my voice calm and professional. I just spoke with Avery. I think there's a bit of a cash flow timing issue with Brad's commission. It's nothing to worry about, just a temporary shortfall. They need to cover the property taxes to avoid a penalty. I used the language of my trade, language he respected. Cash flow issue sounded so much better than my sister spends more money than her husband makes. He grumbled on the other end of the line. That girl and her husband, it's always something. I told her she needs to put some money aside for a rainy day. I know, I said smoothly, and it's good advice. Think of this as a short-term, interest-free loan to bridge the gap. It's a smart financial move to avoid the government penalty. There was a long pause. I heard the sound of his desk chair creaking. Then, I heard a sound that I knew as well as my own heartbeat, the heavy metallic groan of his old safe being opened. It was a floor safe hidden under a rug in his closet. It was his fortress, his personal bank, his symbol of patriarchal power. He loved telling the story of how he had it installed, how it was made of reinforced steel, how only he knew the combination. But it wasn't a fortress. It was a crutch. It was the tool he used to rescue his favorite daughter, allowing him to play the hero while avoiding any real confrontation about her problems. All right, he said with a heavy sigh. Tell her to come over. But you tell her this is the last time, Paisley. I mean it. He didn't mean it. We both knew it. I will, Dad. Thanks, I said, and we hung up. Now, sitting in my dark dining room, that memory felt toxic. It was the key. Avery had needed a significant amount of money. She had been denied, at least initially. Then she'd used me to get access to the safe. How much had he given her? Had he even counted it? On instinct, I opened my web browser. I typed in the make and model of Avery's new SUV. The manufacturer's website loaded. I clicked through the options. The panoramic sunroof, the premium sound system, the leather interior. I knew my sister. She would have gotten every upgrade. I built the car online, matching it to the one I saw in the driveway. When I got to the final page, a number glowed on the screen. The manufacturer's suggested retail price. It was just over $70,000. My breath caught in my throat. Even with the trade-in and financing, the down payment would have been huge. $10,000, maybe $15,000 at a minimum. Where would she get that kind of cash? And then I thought about the accusation. $40,000. It wasn't a random number. It was a specific, large amount. It was the kind of number that would cover a hefty down payment, and pay off a few high-interest credit cards at the same time. It was the kind of number that could buy you a whole new life, or at least the appearance of one. The pieces weren't just falling into place anymore. They were locking together with a series of loud, damning clicks. This wasn't about a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a plan. Avery was in a deep financial hole. She needed a massive infusion of cash. She manipulated our father to get it, and when the money was discovered to be missing, she needed a scapegoat. A simple, believable one. What's more believable than a quiet teenage boy, known for being awkward and a bit of a loner, being near a place he shouldn't have been? It was perfect. It was cruel. And it was, I was now almost certain, exactly what had happened. My hands trembled, but not with fear. It was with rage. They had used my kindness, my desire for peace, my love for them, as a tool for their own deceit. They had counted on me being the fixer. But the fixer had just become the investigator, and I would not stop until I had uncovered every single cent of their lie. Standing on that doorstep, the world seemed to slow down. Every detail became sharp and painfully clear. The chipped paint on the doorframe that I'd meant to fix last spring, the faint, sweet smell of the roast chicken inside, a meal we would never eat, the way my father's hand was braced against the wood, not just blocking the entrance but pushing us away. It was a conscious act of rejection, as solid and real as a wall. As he repeated the accusation, his words echoing in the space between us, I studied the faces of my jury. My father's jaw was set in a stubborn line I knew all too well. It was his "I've made up my mind" face. The one that meant no amount of logic or reason could penetrate his certainty. He wasn't a man searching for truth. He was a man enforcing a verdict. And Avery. My sister stood slightly behind him, peeking out like a malevolent child hiding behind her father's legs. But there was no fear in her eyes. There was a smug, glittering confidence. She had set the stage, delivered her lines, and was now watching the final, tragic act play out exactly as she'd planned. I saw a flicker of a smile on her lips before she caught herself and rearranged her expression into one of deep, sorrowful concern. It was a masterful performance. She was mourning the loss of a relationship she had just purposefully murdered. My mother was the worst. She sat on the couch, her back to us, her head tilted towards the blare of a game show on the television. She was so still, she could have been a statue. A statue of willful ignorance. Every muscle in her body was screaming her refusal to participate, to see, to defend. Her silence wasn't neutral. It was an endorsement. By looking away, she was casting her vote with them. She was choosing her comfortable peace over her daughter's pain and her grandson's honor. Brad, Avery's husband, just stood there, his arms crossed, radiating a kind of passive hostility. He was a weak man, a man who followed his wife's lead in all things. His presence was just another body on their side of the battlefield, another voice in the chorus against us. A lifetime of swallowing my feelings, of being the calm in their storm, had prepared me for this moment. They expected tears. They expected hysterics. They expected a screaming match that they could later use as proof of my instability. I would give them none of it. I felt Leo's small body pressed against my side. He was trembling. This innocent boy, who still believed in the fundamental goodness of people, was being shown the very worst of it by his own blood. That's what broke me open. Not my own pain, but his. It was his small, wounded whisper that changed everything. Mom, I didn't. That simple phrase, spoken in a voice full of hurt and confusion, was like a steel rod shooting up my spine. It was my anchor in the swirling chaos of their lies. It was the only truth in a room thick with deceit. I put my hand on his shoulder, a physical promise that he was not alone, that I was his shield. I know, I said, and my voice was not the voice of the quiet, accommodating Paisley they knew. It was the voice of a mother. It was low, steady, and unbreakable. I lifted my head and looked directly into my father's eyes. I held his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. All the years of seeking his approval, of hoping he would finally see me, truly see me, fell away. I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need anything from him. Listen to me very carefully, I said. My tone was devoid of pleading or anger. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of a new reality. This is the moment you decide. If you truly believe my son, your grandson, is capable of this, if you choose her lie over his truth, then we will not step foot in this house again. There is no coming back from this. This is the end of that road. I had laid it all out. I had made him choose. For a brief, agonizing second, I saw a flicker of conflict in his eyes, a shadow of the father he used to be, the one who taught me right from wrong. He looked at me. Then his gaze shifted to Avery, who was now staring at him, her eyes wide with a silent demand. Protect me. Choose me. And he did. He always chose her. The conflict vanished, replaced by that familiar, stubborn pride. He was the patriarch, He had made a decision, and he would not be questioned. "Then stay out," he said. The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. He didn't yell. He didn't slam the door. He simply held his ground, his body a living barrier between his family and the daughter he was disowning. The finality of it was absolute. There was no negotiation. No room for appeal. I squeezed Leo's shoulder. "Come on, sweetie," I said softly. I turned my back on them. I turned my back on the house I grew up in, on the family who had just betrayed me in the most profound way imaginable. I did not say goodbye. I did not offer one last look of anger or sorrow. To do so would have been to give them more of myself, and I had nothing left to give. As Leo and I walked down that familiar stone path, each step felt heavy, momentous. It was a funeral march for the family I thought I had. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I did not turn around. Looking back was for people who thought there was something worth seeing. For me, there was only the future, and my son walking beside me. We got into the car, and I closed the door, the sound shutting out the world we had just left behind. As I started the engine, a cold, clear thought settled in my mind, as sharp and precise as a line on a balance sheet. People who live in denial, who build their homes on foundations of lies, never see the real threat. They're always watching the front door, expecting a loud, angry confrontation. They never notice when the truth gets into its own car, quietly drives away, and starts building a case that will bring the whole rotten structure down. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. That night, my home transformed. The dining room table, usually reserved for Leo's homework and our shared meals, became my war room. The house was completely silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard. Leo was asleep, safe in his room, but the image of his wounded face was burned into my mind. It was my fuel. The hurt was a deep, cold well inside me, but I couldn't afford to fall into it. Not yet. Emotion was a liability. Facts were ammunition. I was no longer Paisley Hartman, the daughter, the sister. I was Paisley Hartman, the forensic accountant, the person companies hired when they suspected a trusted employee was bleeding them dry. My process was always the same. I detach. I follow the money. The numbers never have an agenda. They don't have favorite children. They just are. I started with what I knew. A missing $40,000. A brand new luxury SUV. A sister with a long history of financial desperation. It was a clear and obvious trail, but I needed more than a strong suspicion. I needed a chain of evidence so undeniable that not even my father's stubborn pride or my mother's willful blindness could refute it. My first step was to build a financial profile of Avery and Brad for the last 6 months. This was easier than it should have been. Years ago, in a moment of manufactured crisis, Avery had given me the login information for their joint bank account. "Can you just look at it for me, Pies?" she had cried. "I don't understand any of this, and Brad is going to be so mad." I had helped her then, of course. I had balanced their account and set up alerts for them. She never changed the password. She was arrogant. She assumed I would never have a reason to look again without her permission. She assumed I would always be on her side. I logged in. My breath hitched as the summary page loaded. Their checking account balance was $214.37. They were perpetually on the edge of financial ruin. I navigated to the transaction history, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I set the date range for the last 90 days and began to scroll. It was a sea of red. Overdraft fees, late payment charges, dozens of purchases from high-end clothing stores and expensive restaurants. They were living a life they couldn't afford, one transaction at a time. But I wasn't looking for their spending habits. I was looking for cash, large sums of it. I sorted the transactions by deposits. There were Brad's commission checks, sporadic and inconsistent. And then I saw them. The first one was dated 7 weeks ago. A cash deposit. $5,000. It was an odd number, a round number. People rarely deposit exactly $5,000 in cash unless it comes from a specific source. 2 weeks after that, another one, $7,500. Then another, a week later, $4,000. They were staggered, irregular, as if trying not to create a pattern. But to me, the lack of a pattern was the pattern. This wasn't income. This was something else. My mind raced. My father was meticulous, but in an old-fashioned way. He didn't use software. He kept a small leather-bound ledger in his desk drawer, where he noted every withdrawal from the safe. He called it counting the safe. He would do it at random times whenever he was feeling anxious about money. He'd told me once, "It calms me down to see it there." I remembered a call from my mom about a month ago. "Your father is in a mood," she had sighed, pacing around, counting the safe again. "He's worried about the economy." I pulled up a calendar and started mapping the dates. The $7,500 deposit into Avery's account was made on a Monday. The preceding Saturday, according to my mother, was when my father had been in a mood. It was a link, but it was still circumstantial. I needed something solid. The SUV was the centerpiece. A vehicle like that isn't bought with a series of small cash deposits. There would have been a significant down payment. I opened a new browser tab and searched for the largest Lexus dealership in my parents' area. Their website was glossy and corporate. Under their testimonials section, I found what I was hoping for. A photo of a beaming couple standing next to a new car. The dealership often posted these on their social media pages. I went to their Facebook page. I scrolled back through their posts week by week. It was a long shot. But Avery loved the spotlight. She would never pass up an opportunity to have her success documented. And there it was. Dated 8 weeks ago, a picture of Avery and Brad, grinning from ear to ear, standing next to a gleaming white SUV identical to the one in the driveway. The caption was nauseatingly cheerful. Congratulations to Brad and Avery Hartman on their beautiful new Lexus RX 350. Welcome to the family. My heart was pounding now. I clicked on the photo. In the background, through the dealership's large glass window, a sign was visible. It was a promotional sign for a financing event, and on it was the date. The photo was taken on a Friday. The following Monday, the first large cash deposit appeared in their bank account. This was the anchor point. I now had a timeline, but I still needed to connect the cash to my father's safe. It was the missing link. Then I remembered something else. About a year ago, there had been a couple of minor break-ins in my parents' neighborhood. My father, obsessed with security, had bought a set of motion-activated security cameras. He'd had trouble setting up the app on his phone. Guess who he had called for help? I had installed the system for him. I had configured the cameras, set the motion detection zones, and linked it all to an app on his phone and iPad. I also, as a backup, linked the account to my own email address. Just in case you forget the password, Dad, I had told him. He had never removed my access. He had forgotten all about it. My hands were trembling as I opened the app on my laptop. I logged in with my credentials. The system was live. I could see the camera feed from the front porch, the driveway, the back door, and one more, the one I was looking for. There was a small, discreet camera pointed down the main hallway, the one that led to the master bedroom. He'd wanted to be able to see if anyone was walking toward their room at night. The app stored motion-activated recordings in the cloud for 90 days. My heart felt like a drum against my ribs. I navigated to the event history and set the date range, starting from the day before the SUV was purchased. I started scrolling through the video clips. They were mostly just a few seconds long. My mother walking down the hall with laundry. My father heading to the kitchen for a late-night snack. My niece Maya running past with a toy. I worked my way forward, hour by hour, day by day. It was painstaking. My eyes burned from staring at the screen. I drank coffee after coffee, the caffeine sharpening my focus. And then I found it. The timestamp was from 2 months ago, a Tuesday afternoon. I knew my father was at his Rotary Club meeting, and my mother was at her book club. The clip was 34 seconds long. The video showed the empty hallway. Then, a figure appeared from the left, from the direction of the living room. It was Avery. She was walking quickly, almost furtively. She glanced over her shoulder, back down the empty hall, as if to make sure no one was there. In her right hand, she was clutching a thick white bank envelope, the kind used for cash. She disappeared into the master bedroom at the end of the hall. 20 seconds later, she emerged. Her hands were empty. She walked back down the hall and out of the frame. I watched the clip again, and a fourth time. It was her. There was no doubt. She was in the house when no one else was home, walking out of the bedroom where the safe was located, moments after holding a cash envelope. I took a screenshot. A clear, perfect still image of my sister caught in the act. I saved it to my desktop. I spent the rest of the night and all of the next day gathering everything. I downloaded Avery's bank statements and highlighted every suspicious cash deposit. I printed the dated photo from the Lexus dealership's Facebook page. I printed a copy of the sales listing for the SUV, showing its high value. I printed the screenshot from the security camera footage. I placed each piece of evidence into its own clear sleeve and then into a separate manila folder. I typed up labels for each one. My hands steady now. Exhibit A, bank statements. Avery and Brad Hartman exhibit. B, vehicle purchase documentation exhibit. C, timeline of cash deposits. Exhibit D, surveillance footage. Still, when I was done, the sun was coming up. I stacked the folders neatly and placed them in a small, sturdy banker's box. It looked just like the boxes I took to my clients when I presented the findings of an audit. I felt a profound, chilling calm. The emotional storm had passed. I was left with the cold, hard certainty of the numbers. I wasn't going back to my father's house to plead my case. I wasn't going to yell or cry. I was going to present my findings. I was going to show them the truth they had decided to ignore, and it would be irrefutable. Wednesday evening felt like the calm before a hurricane. A heavy, unnatural stillness hung in the air as I drove to my parents' house. I had called my father earlier in the day, my voice level and devoid of emotion. I have some information regarding the missing money, I said. I think it's important that you, Mom, Avery, and Brad are all present. I will be there at 7. He had grunted an affirmation, a sound that was a mixture of surprise and suspicion. He likely expected me to come back begging for forgiveness, perhaps with a ridiculous payment plan to return money we never took. He was not expecting this. The banker's box sat on the passenger seat beside me. It was my shield and my sword. Inside it wasn't just paper. It was the truth. It was the story of their betrayal, told in the clean, irrefutable language of dates, times, and dollar signs. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were heading to a client meeting and not a confrontation that would either save my son's name or shatter my family forever. The pain was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but my focus was absolute. I parked on the street this time, not in the driveway. It was a small act of separation, a declaration that I was no longer part of the inner circle. I walked up the path, the weight of the box feeling solid and reassuring in my hands. My father opened the door before I knocked. He looked tired, his face etched with new lines of stress. He saw the box and his eyes narrowed. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice rough. "My findings," I said simply, and walked past him into the living room. The scene was set like a grim tableau. My mother was perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisting a handkerchief in her lap. Avery was sitting in an armchair, trying to project an air of bored indifference, but the tense set of her shoulders gave her away. She was wearing an expensive silk blouse, a piece of armor for the battle she thought she had already won. Brad sat beside her, scrolling endlessly through his phone, a man trying to make himself invisible. No one greeted me. The air was thick with resentment. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked to the large coffee table in the center of the room and placed the banker's box on it with a firm, definitive thud. The sound made them all flinch. "Before anyone says anything," I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the silence. "I want to be very clear. This is not a discussion. This is not a negotiation. I am here to present you with facts. What you do with them is up to you." I opened the box and took out the first folder, labeled Exhibit A. I opened it and laid out the printed bank statements on the table, facing them. "These are Avery and Brad's bank statements for the last 3 months, I said, my voice as neutral as if I were reading a weather report. "As you can see, they have been operating at a significant financial deficit for some time. Lots of overdraft fees, late charges, a very precarious situation." Brad looked up from his phone, his face flushing with anger. "You have no right." "I have every right," I cut him off, my gaze unflinching. "You made this my business when you accused my son of being a thief to cover your tracks." I let that sink in before continuing. I picked up the next folder, Exhibit B, Vehicle Purchase. I laid out the photo from the dealership's Facebook page. Avery's smiling face stared up at them. "This is the new Lexus. It was purchased 8 weeks ago, a car with an MSRP of over $70,000. A significant purchase for a couple with $200 in their checking account." Avery scoffed, a brittle, nervous sound. "We got a great financing deal, and we used our savings for the down payment." "Let's talk about that down payment," I said, moving to my next folder. Exhibit C, Timeline of Cash Deposits. I laid out a spreadsheet I had created. On one side was a list of dates. On the other, a list of cash deposits made into their account. "Funny thing about your savings, Avery. They appeared in your bank account in the form of large, untraceable cash deposits starting the very next business day after you bought this car. 5,000 here, 7,500 there. It adds up to just over $40,000. My father leaned forward, squinting at the papers. I could see the first seeds of doubt being planted in his mind. He was a man who understood numbers, even if he chose to ignore them. "Where did the cash come from?" my mother whispered, looking at Avery for the first time. Avery's composure was beginning to crack. "It was a cashback bonus from a work deal Brad did," she said, her voice a little too high. "It was all legitimate." I didn't even look at her. I just reached into the box for my final folder. My hand was perfectly steady. This was the kill shot. "And finally," I said, my voice dropping slightly, Exhibit D. I pulled out the 8x10 high-resolution print of the screenshot from the security camera. I placed it in the very center of the table, on top of everything else. The image was perfectly clear. Avery, in the hallway, looking over her shoulder. The white bank envelope clutched in her hand. The timestamp in the corner. 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday when she knew no one would be home. The room fell into a profound, bottomless silence. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick marking a second of Avery's world collapsing. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. She brought the handkerchief to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. My father stared at the picture, his face turning a sickly, pale gray. He picked it up with a trembling hand, bringing it closer to his face as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was his own hallway, his own daughter, his own security system, betraying the secret he hadn't even known he was keeping. Avery stared at the photo, her face completely white. All the smugness, all the confidence, had drained away, leaving behind the terrified, guilty face of a cornered liar. Her lip began to tremble, but the most telling reaction came from Brad. He looked at the photo, then at his wife's crumbling expression. He let out a long, weary sigh, a sound of profound defeat. He stood up, shoving his phone into his pocket. "I told you this would come back on you, Avery," he muttered, not looking at anyone. "I told you this was a stupid idea." And with that, he turned and walked out of the room. We heard the front door open and close behind him. He had abandoned her. In the end, her protector had saved only himself, leaving Avery utterly and completely alone with the wreckage she had created. The golden child's shine had finally, irrevocably, gone out. In the deafening silence that followed Brad's exit, my father slowly sank back into his armchair. He didn't seem to fall. He seemed to deflate. The proud, stubborn man who had blocked my entry just days ago was gone, replaced by a frail, diminished old man who looked utterly lost. He held the photograph in his hand, staring at it not with anger, but with a kind of vacant, wounded disbelief. The architecture of his world, the one where Avery was perfect and everything was under his control, had been demolished in an instant. My mother began to weep. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, continuous flow of tears, the kind that come from a place of deep, irreparable damage. She rocked back and forth slightly, her gaze fixed on Avery. "Avery, honey, tell me it's not true," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Tell me there's a mistake. Tell Paisley she made a mistake." It was a last desperate plea for the lie to hold, for the comfortable reality to reassert itself, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The numbers were too cold, the photograph too clear. Avery finally broke, her face crumpled, and she let out a raw, desperate sob. "I panicked," she cried, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Brad was going to leave me. We were going to lose the house. The bills were just everywhere. I didn't know what else to do. I was going to pay it back. I swear I was going to pay it all back." She was playing her last card, victimhood. She was trying to frame her theft as an act of desperation, a mistake made under pressure. It was the story she had been telling herself, the one she expected us all to accept. The old Paisley would have. The old Paisley would have felt a pang of sympathy, would have started thinking of ways to fix it, to smooth it over. But the old Paisley was gone. I looked at my sister, my face a mask of cold calm. "No," I said, and the single word cut through her hysterics like a blade. She stopped, her mouth half open, surprised by my tone. "You're not going to do that," I continued, my voice low and dangerously quiet. "You're not going to make this about your bills or your marriage. We can talk about the $40,000 you stole from our parents later. That's between you and them. But what you did to my son is between you and me. You didn't just panic, Avery. You made a choice. You planned. You saw a problem. And you decided that the solution was to frame a 13-year-old boy. You decided to destroy your nephew to save yourself. There is no version of panic that makes that okay." My words hung in the air, stark and unforgiving. I had drawn a line in the sand, separating her financial crimes from her moral ones. The second, the one against my son, was the one that could never be excused. My father stirred, looking from my face to Avery's. He tried to reclaim his role as the family patriarch, the fixer of all things. "Paisley, please," he started, his voice weak. "She made a terrible mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. But we're family. We can get through this. We need to forget this and move on." It was his default setting. Erase the problem, pretend it didn't happen, restore the peace at any cost. For 36 years, it had worked. "No," I said again, this time turning to face him directly. The sadness I felt for the broken man in the chair was overwhelmed by the memory of him standing in the doorway, his face like stone. "We're not forgetting this. And you need to understand something, Dad. This isn't a family. Not anymore. Family doesn't accuse children to protect thieves. Family doesn't sacrifice the innocent to comfort the guilty. I don't know what this is, but it's not a family, and I am done pretending that it is. The finality in my voice seemed to shock him into silence. He had no response. His old tools, denial, forgiveness by decree, were useless now. I turned back to the coffee table and began to gather my papers. I slid the bank statements, the timeline, and the photograph back into their folders with precise, deliberate movements. I was clearing the table, clearing my life. I stacked the folders neatly and placed them back in the banker's box. I closed the lid. The audit was over. "When you are ready to apologize to Leo," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "My weeping mother, my broken father, my disgraced sister, you will do it directly. Not through me, not with excuses. You will look my son in the eye and you will tell him that you were wrong and that he is innocent. He deserves that much. Until then, there is nothing more to say." I picked up the box. I walked to the front door without looking back. My hand was on the knob when I paused. I thought about the way he had held the door, creating a barrier. I turned the knob, pulled the door open, and walked out into the cool night air, but I didn't close it behind me. I left it wide open. I wanted them to sit there in their shattered living room, with the evidence of their lies spread out on the table. I wanted them to feel the draft. I wanted them to see the dark, empty space where I used to be, the space they had created. It wasn't a gesture of hope, of leaving a way back for them. It was a statement. I was out in the world, in the truth, and I was leaving the door open so they could see exactly what they had chosen to lock themselves inside with. The mess, the lies, and each other. The weeks that followed the confrontation were defined by a profound and unsettling silence. The constant low-level hum of anxiety that had been the background music of my life was gone. There were no frantic Sunday morning calls from my mother, trying to smooth over some argument between Avery and Dad. There were no tearful midweek texts from Avery, asking for a loan or a favor. The silence they left was vast. At first it felt like an amputation. I would find myself checking my phone, my body still conditioned to expect the next crisis. But as the days turned into a week, and then two, the silence began to change. It was no longer an empty space but a peaceful one. It was the sound of my own life, uninterrupted. I started to notice things I hadn't before. The way the morning sun slanted across our kitchen floor. The specific, goofy way Leo laughed when he was watching his favorite YouTuber. The taste of my morning coffee, savored slowly, without a knot of dread in my stomach. Leo and I built a new world for ourselves in that quiet. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. The wound was there, but we were determined not to let it define us. We focused on us. We had movie marathons on Fridays, piling blankets on the couch and eating popcorn for dinner. We took long walks in the park on Saturdays, talking about everything and nothing. School, video games, the future. We started playing chess again, a game my ex-husband had taught him. He was getting good, and for the first time, he beat me. The look of quiet pride on his face was a balm to my soul. I watched him closely, looking for signs of lingering damage. He was more reserved than before, a little less quick to trust. A layer of his childhood innocence had been stripped away, and that was a grief I held privately. But he was also stronger, more self-assured. He had faced the worst kind of betrayal and had come through it with his integrity intact, fiercely protected by his mother. Our bond, already strong, had been forged into something unbreakable. We were a team. One afternoon, about a month after the confrontation, I was working at the dining room table when the doorbell rang. My body tensed instantly. We weren't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and my heart dropped into my stomach. It was Avery. She was alone. She looked different, smaller. She wasn't wearing her usual uniform of expensive, perfectly coordinated clothes. She had on a simple pair of jeans and a gray sweatshirt. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore no makeup. The mask of the golden child was gone. All that was left was my sister. My first instinct was to keep the door locked, to pretend I wasn't home. I was not ready for this. I did not want this. But then I looked past her and saw Leo, who had heard the bell and was peeking out from the hallway, his face curious. I couldn't show him fear or anger. I had to show him strength. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Hello, Avery," I said. My voice was neutral, flat. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared at the welcome mat, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She was holding a paper bag from a local bakery. "Hi, Paisley," she mumbled. I brought muffins for Leo, the blueberry ones he likes." It was such a small domestic gesture. So normal, it felt bizarre. "Leo is here," I said, keeping my hand on the door. I did not invite her in. She seemed to gather a bit of courage and finally looked up, first at me, then past me to where Leo was standing. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. Can I just talk to him?" "For a minute?" she asked, her voice shaking. This was the moment. The condition I had set. An apology directly to him. I looked at Leo, a silent question in my eyes. It was his choice. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I stepped back from the door, allowing her to enter, but I stayed close, a silent guardian. She walked into the entryway, stopping a few feet from Leo. The air was thick with a month of unspoken words. "Hey, Leo," she started, her voice raspy. I came here to tell you something really important." She took a shaky breath. "What I did was wrong. It was a lie. You never did anything. You never went near that safe. I was in trouble and I was scared and I made up a horrible story. I blamed you to protect myself. It was the worst thing I've ever done, and it was my fault. All of it. I am so sorry." Tears were now streaming freely down her face. She didn't try to wipe them away. It was a raw, stripped-down confession. There were no excuses, no justifications. Just the ugly truth. Leo listened, his expression unreadable. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He just looked observant. He was taking it all in, processing it. After she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then, he nodded once. "Okay," he said. Just that one word. It wasn't, "I forgive you." It wasn't, "It's okay." It was just, "Okay?" It was an acknowledgement. A receipt for a debt paid. He had received the apology he was owed. The transaction was complete. Avery seemed to sag with relief, though she may have been hoping for more. She held out the bag of muffins. "These are for you," she said again, her voice a whisper. Leo took the bag from her. "Thank you," he said politely, and then he turned and walked back to his room, closing the door behind him. Avery stood there for a moment, looking lost. Her purpose for being here was finished. She turned to me, her eyes pleading. "Paisley, I held up a hand, stopping her. "That was for him, Avery. That was the first step. What happens with you and me? I don't know. I can't even think about that right now." She nodded, a fresh wave of tears welling. "I know," she whispered. "Brad left me. Dad isn't speaking to me. He sold the SUV to pay himself back. Everything is a mess." I felt a distant, faint echo of the old sympathy, but it was buried under too much scar tissue. "That sounds hard," I said, and the words were honest, but they were not an invitation. They were an observation from across a vast canyon she had blasted between us. She seemed to understand. She nodded again, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and turned to leave. "Okay," she said. "I get it." I watched her walk down the path and get into an old, beat-up sedan I didn't recognize. As she drove away, I closed the door, and this time I locked it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was something. It was the truth finally spoken aloud. And as I leaned against the door, I realized that my peace was no longer dependent on their actions. Whether they apologized or not, whether they fixed their lives or not, was their story. My story was here in this quiet house with my son, and it was enough. Months later, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in a long time. It was my father. I hesitated, then answered, keeping my voice calm and neutral. "Hello?" "Paisley," he grumbled. There was no apology in his tone. There never would be. He wasn't built for it. "Your mother wanted me to call. We've made a new rule. We installed a sign-in sheet for the safe. Anyone takes anything out, they have to write it down. The amount, the date, everything." I couldn't help but let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't a laugh of humor, but of irony. He had treated a catastrophic moral failure like a bookkeeping error. He had found a procedural solution for a problem of the soul. "Good," I said simply. "Treat trust like a transaction. That way, you'll finally understand its cost." He was silent for a moment, the line crackling. Then he sighed, a sound heavy with resentment. "You think you're better than us now, don't you?" The question was meant to be an accusation, a final attempt to pull me back into the old dynamic of guilt and shame. But it had no power over me anymore. "No," I said, and my voice was soft, but the words were solid steel. "I just stopped letting you be worse to me." I hung up before he could respond. I didn't slam the phone down. I just ended the call. I exhaled, a long, slow breath that felt like it carried the last bit of the old world out of my lungs. I turned and saw Leo standing in the kitchen doorway, a questioning look on his face. "Ready for breakfast?" I asked, a real smile spreading across my face. He grinned back, the shadows of the past months finally gone from his eyes. "Only if it's pancakes." As we stood in the kitchen, mixing batter and laughing about something silly, the weight of years finally, truly lifted. I realized revenge was never the goal. I never wanted to destroy them. I just wanted them to stop destroying me. The truth was all I had ever wanted. And the truth hadn't burned all the bridges. It had just shown me which ones were safe to cross. It had taught me that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not to fight to get back in, but to find the strength to lock the doors that were hurting you, and to build a new home in the quiet, peaceful space you've made for yourself.